I want to start with a paradox. Just as my desire for total world domination is waning suddenly, this technology arrives, like a vampire at the threshold, to seduce me with promises of control, automation, omnipotence. And I have to decide, do I invite it in? If I do, what happens? Is it a one-time seduction? Or does it consume me entirely? Will my blood become contaminated? Or will I thrive and empower myself as an artist? Do I decide now, or can I change my mind later? Is the choice even final? Here's the thing, these aren't abstract questions anymore. AI is no longer just a tool, it's an environment. It's a medium we're all living in. Whether we actively choose to use it or not, it's using us, it's shaping the world around us, whether we consent to it or not. As a professor and as an artist, I cannot ignore anything with that much power because I have a responsibility to the students that I teach. I have to confront it, I have to engage with it, I have to question it, I have to learn what it means to me, even if I don't want world domination. So today I'm showing you 12 projects. Some use AI and some don't, and I'm going to ask you to wonder alongside me, how does AI shape these works? Or how could they have been different with AI if they don't use AI? What would they be if I chose them differently? How have these projects shaped me, and how might they have shaped me differently, or not at all, had I made other choices? Next slide. We're going to be focusing on number 9 as a sort of like little case study, so we're going to get there eventually. Next slide. So this is a set of postcards that I started producing a few years ago. I think I launched them when I was doing a residency, teaching residency at Locust Projects, but I have been drawing these cards, or the patterns. There are 3 sorts of things here that I focus on in my drawing practice, which began, I think, about 15 years ago. I needed to not be sitting at the computer. I spent a lot of time sitting at the computer, and I wanted to be in a different position. Literally, I felt like if I had to spend 16 hours doing work as a designer, this was before I was teaching at FIU, I couldn't be creative after that. I couldn't be sitting in the same posture. And so what I had was my iPad, which was small, and there was no stylus at the time. It was just my finger, and I started toying around with the drawing tools. And many, many years later, this led to this practice, which is focused on 3 sorts of things. And they are all pattern related, and this sort of relates to AI in a tangential way, as you probably imagine. None of these are drawn with AI, although I have no doubt that they could be. But AI is about patterns. Large language models are about patterns, pattern manipulation, pattern recognition, and pattern reconfiguration. So here we have patterns that are actually the groups are called the wallpaper groups. So they have another name, the orbifold notation. There are only 17 ways that you can tile a rectangle on a flat surface. Why 17? It's because only 17 have been discovered. These are not inventions, they're actual mathematical principles, facts. So when you look at actual wallpaper, even though the word wallpaper, the word that I mentioned, is not related to actual wallpaper, but more of a mathematical notation, there's only 17 ways that you can repeat a pattern on a flat surface. And then the other is the rotational. There's 2 elements there, the dolphins on the top, middle right, somewhere top on the left, and then the pelicans in the yellow. And then there's like the rooster that my sister helped me rename. I had named it Little Haiti Alarm Clock. And she says, I think you mean cock, That's like, yes, you're right. So it's interesting because without AI, I will confess these don't use AI. I already had this capacity to work serially and to work accumulatively. I basically build archives. What you're seeing here are just samples of literally thousands of patterns and hundreds of mandalas. So next slide, we're going to explore this a little bit more. And why don't we play the video on the black. So this is a little book. I think brought a copy to pass around, did I? Did I bring my book? No, I didn't read my book. Okay. So this was an attempt to break away from a challenge, which was given to me. Dimitry, I know you like to make art. I don't know that you like to show art. And I was like, guilty. You know, I realized that for me, the making was the thing. It's very process oriented. And also when I did show these patterns, and the postcards are small, people had a hard time seeing them in another context. So I made this presentation to try to show them in terms of their potential in environments, you know. So this combines the work in the book, which is just the mandalas, and then turns them into prints and wallpapers, murals, etc. This book is a more recent project that I showed at Collective 62, and it was part of a show called Disturbances in the Field, curated by Michelle Weinberg. And it's a separate side of my practice. This book is very large. The other book is very small. As you can see, I've adapted a IKEA sawhorse to create a special stand for the book. But these are sort of like fugitive photographs that I take usually in my car when I shouldn't be taking a photo, although I do have like things to hang my phone on. And then I write little apps to change the color of the photo. Again, this is for me to be off the computer as much as possible, but in this case using my phone. And some of them are macro photography, so this particular spread here on the left is probably just smudge from my iPad screen with just my fingerprints, and then on the right is an actual photo taken in this sort of manner where the car is moving, the phone is moving, and then I'm doing very little in terms of manipulation other than through color to the work. Next slide. This is another project where, this is probably the oldest project you'll see here. Started initially in 2003, I was at a show, I had a solo show at a gallery in Midtown Miami then called Rocket Projects, curated by Nina Arias, and I had this one shape in the middle piece there, which I call box kite. It's basically a box with a corner pulled out. And I had this whole solo show based on this idea of the boxes that I was living with after my partner died, and I was trying to get over my grief, and finally looked at the boxes, and I finally saw a way of turning them into something else. And the result was this modular system that I call Hula Quilt, and it's had multiple stages. So this was in 2003, and then in 2012, I had an opportunity to show them at New York Fashion Week, and for a show there where I designed the sets as one of the artists and participating. And I had, by then, I think there are 9 shapes now, and they're made in 12 colors that are all recycled milk jug plastic. So what you're seeing essentially is something that was, all of these panels are post-consumer recycled plastic that basically people drank milk out of at some point and threw away, or at least in this case recycled, and then they can become something that can last for years, even decades. I've had one in my window at home that I would vampire back to life by replacing panels as they got brittle, you know, because of the sun, because it was in a window. And it lasted for many, many years. Finally, I had to put it to rest and put it back fully in the recycling bin. So this idea of extending, using a system, a lot of the work that I do has to do with collective play. Sometimes, as so far you've seen, it's mostly me playing with my own ideas. But this system here is actually collaborative in the sense that it's designed a bit like a Lego set. You don't need any tools to put these together. They just snap together and they snap apart. You can reconfigure them. And it blends the distinction between art and design and play, which is very key to the work that I do. Next. So this was, this has a trajectory. The video that you're seeing here was done for the initial version of this. It was curated by a former student of mine, Chris Friday, an amazing artist at the Lowe Museum at University of Miami. And then it became a solo show a couple of years ago at the MBUS Library, and which you can see down there in the right, some images from. That storefront has handwriting on it, which is people writing their thoughts about literature, about writing, about the impact of language, of education, of libraries. These are all things that were very rare for me growing up in Haiti. And in particular, it was impossible, I don't think they existed, there were no books about being gay or queer when I was growing up there, certainly not in my library, even though I had a good education there. So for me, this part of my practice is very essential, and this collection is meant to play on the idea of propaganda, these large banners that can then you have to decide to cut them up and to protect books with them. So that's why they have a sort of paper hologram quality where you can read the word banned in different scales, but then you come up close and there are these little messages like only the best books are banned, or Americans protect libraries, and so forth, right? So, so this work ties in. When I had this exhibition, this is the first mention of AI I'm going to make, the day of the opening, so it's mostly these physical prints, I had been collecting a series of quotes by literary figures mostly, but not so much from their literature, but also thinkers, educators, philosophers that dealt with these subjects about what I call expression as freedom, or freedom as expression. And I wanted to incorporate them in the show in some way, and part of it was inviting people to share their favorite literary quotes on this window. And so there was a marker available, and the window looked like it was still being installed, because it's kind of like a weird storefront window inside of the space that's actually not, it's blocked. You can't actually go through the door. So it's a part of the gallery you have to address in this case, and this is how I chose to address it. So I built this app I'm going to be demonstrating, the early, a version of, in a little bit, the day of the opening. That morning I thought, you know what, let me try and code this. And this was my first attempt at vibe coding. So we'll see what that ended up looking like. Next slide. And by the way, if you have any questions during the talk, it is interactive. This is a piece, it has a longer title. My memory palace is more of a laku. When I draw, it rains. And you can see now I'm starting to evolve my notion of working with this practice of, which is for me intuitive and meditative. I may have not mentioned earlier that I didn't just want to get off the computer and be horizontal with cats on my legs while I drew, but I also did not want to know what I was drawing. You know, so the point is, as a trained designer, it's very hard to turn off the conceptual mind. You know, you either have to be really exhausted on drugs, which I don't do, or I don't know what. And really what ended up happening was telling myself, I'm gonna just draw on this piece of glass and find out what happens. And this is what, so now I'm making stuff with it, and I'm starting to take this archive of materials and connecting it to my personal history. In this case, I'm taking a figure in the blue rug, the largest rug there, that I'm calling the goddess of memory, or my great-grandmother Yaya, who was the oldest relative that I knew as a living person. And she was a healer, and she was a medicine woman. And I'm depicting her as on this blue field where the water from, or the background from that is then pouring into the second rug where my hands are extended to receive the memories, you know, of the ancestors. The pillows are all sort of abstract sort of patterns that I've drawn, and each pillow, that grouping is called Chita Tande, which in Creole means sit and listen. It's also a show, a way that one of the educational shows on WLO Radio, where I volunteered for like 4 years, doing reading for the blind, just before the pandemic, and then they killed the program. They used to have they have a Creole program, and they used to start by saying "Chita tande radio l'école," meaning sit down and listen radio l'école, and that reminded me of storytelling, you know, which is a big part of my practice. And so I'm evoking the memory of Yaya, which was my grandfather's mother, and my grandmother Meme, who was a who loved to sew, and who's the one who taught me about patterns with her sewing trunk. You know, she would pull out these tiny pieces of fabric, and it was the fabrics that she loved. You know, and she made clothes for me and my brother initially, and then my sister was born, and we got nothing. It was all about dresses after that. And so in the little pyramid of pillows was the sound of my grandmother's sewing machine, and also the rain, which represented my grandfather's love of gardening, and why a lot of the themes are sort of organic and floral, or vegetative at the very least. Next slide. This piece is called Blank American Blank. And when I first made this piece, it's designed to be stood in. So if you're standing in the corner, you can actually have the piece projecting onto you. So you have the word American, and you have these words to the left and right. And I'm taking the pairings of the word American. A great way to think about this is like the difference between Indian American, American Indian, Native American, and or what all of those phrases imply. And then when you start to create triplets instead of pairings, what happens in this case? And this was inspired by, I was at a talk at the PAM as an audience member, and there was a Q&A, and this was in 2015 in the heat of that election cycle. I had been sensing as an immigrant for the first time. I had put the word immigrant in the bio of my social media. I think at the time it was Twitter. Because for the first time I understood that being an immigrant was really becoming politicized. And I created this pattern called American Immigrant, which is these two words overlapping and creating this sort of weave pattern of that. And that led to this piece directly, where I started to research these pairings. And it took a long time. I had about 130 of them. And when AI came about, meaning text and LLMs, I brought the database into into ChatGPT, and I said, how can we extend this? And as a result, now I have 190 of these triplets. You know, so that's one. This is literally the first time that I intentionally used AI in a work where it felt very productive. And some of the pairings and triplets that came out of it were really some that I would not have ever thought of. And to the point of when I had Native American, and I think it was the way this is organized, it's alphabetical on the left, but on the right, that word is chosen, it's editorialized in a way. So there's a sort of subtle progression that happens. So it starts with A's on the left, and it goes all the way to the end of the alphabet. And on the right, the pairings are more accidental, or maybe not. So suddenly, I don't even think I had put in the original, my actual database into the AI. I was probably suspicious at that time of what it might do, but it started to actually suggest specific tribal names, which I would not have leapt to immediately. One, I didn't know most of them, and so for the next version of this piece, that became a part of the database. Next slide.
Dimitry?
Yes?
So do you then research the pairings or the names? Because we know that there's always some level of error in the search engine. Do you then kind of go and check it out to make
Yes, absolutely. So, you know, a lot of this is about, it's a sort of like an affective, pairing, right? It's about like how we feel when we see words together. So so in this case, it's almost like you notice that there's a lot of glitchiness to even the way that the text is presented in that. The full piece is about 4 minutes long right now. It's timed based on the time since the Independence Day, so it would be 250 seconds if I were to redo it today, given that it's July 4th almost. And so, so part of it is about this kind of like slipperiness of language, right? And it's trying to find the space for creating new combinations with things that we think are fixed, And so in a way, error correction is it's more about that poetic possibility in this case, but in other cases, definitely a lot of checking when it comes to things that have to be factual. That's a great question. This is just a collection of short videos that I have produced And each of them, I've had to make a decision about AI, because all of these came about more or less in the time of AI, and none of them actually use AI. But in some cases, it was because it was too early on and I didn't know enough about the visual stuff. It's also a concern about the environment, in terms of, especially with video, it's one of the hardest things to process in terms of these models, and I mostly work with text. And I will share a link to this portfolio at the end. I won't go into this now, but if you click on any one of these, they will take you to the video on my Vimeo page. A lot of them have been in festivals, the first three, and then so they sort of are sequential. And the last one was at a show at Bridge Red, and it involves my cats fighting. They're actually playing. But they're basically experimental video shorts that are increasingly, they started working in After Effects, and then the last two, I'm starting to work more in real time with video, which has less to do with AI, but it definitely has a lot to do with programming, using a program called Resolume Arena, which is used by VJs. So, next slide. This is the piece that I wanted to share specifically, I was asked to talk about. So this is the app that I created for this show called the Unreading Room, and the app is called the Unreading Room, and you can actually scan the QR code now and experience the app for yourself. Maybe we can play the video, maybe just go to the next slide, because the video is actually, I've already incorporated into the next slides. And then next slide. This will show a little demo of it. This isn't still it's not the earliest version, it's not the version that was in the show, but it's the current version still. And then the next slide will show you what's planned for the app. And I have to confess that I do have a background in programming. When I was a teenager, I had a Commodore 64, or my cousin did, I don't remember. And I learned how to program BASIC, and eventually made quite a bit, so just hold on this slide for a second. These are the features that I want in the app. Not all of them are there, but they will be in the next version that I'm working on in beta as a vibe coder. So I do have a background in programming, but this background had remained dormant since I've been teaching it at FIU. I've had no time to keep up with my coding skills. I like to joke that I've learned JavaScript 5 times and forgotten it 5 times, because I would never work on something long enough to be able to actually stick with it. I'm really a resolute and a recalcitrant generalist. I don't like to specialize in my practice. I like to be able to, I think that's one of the gifts of our age, is to be able to try different tools. And so unfortunately that means that you can't always keep your skills. And what I have learned, one of the lessons that I learned with this project, was that you can revive a practice or a skill by virtue of using AI. This is truly a really positive way of looking at it. I have really negative things to say about the companies that are building and directing our AI tools right now, but the tools themselves, irrespective of how they were created in terms of stealing our creative output, are really remarkable in some of the ways that you can, do things like this. And so for me, coding is really, along with my, this is my indoor voice, I realized that it would never stay on my tombstone that website was so fabulously coded that nobody really cared, at least as far as my practice was concerned, and that I had wasted a lot of time debugging code, looking for semicolons that were out of place, days, hours, weeks of my life that could vanish in terms of being able to use tools like this. So basically, the impetus for this app is, again, to present these quotes in today's format, which is mostly people have phones, and we are doom scrolling, and in this case, it's to slow us down, let us read some important words by someone that might actually inspire you, and make you think about reading for a change instead of scrolling. So, and this actually had an impact on me when AI kind of took over Instagram, and I fell into the Epstein file rabbit hole for a couple of weeks and went into a very, very dark place where I was wondering, have we progressed at all? What is real? And all of these things. And the thing that saved me was that I had to do a presentation where this app was being presented, and I had to look at the screen and record it, and 3 quotes woke me up out of that realization that there's nothing I could do about what was happening in this part of the social media that had taken over my brain, but I still had a life to live and things to give the world and people that I was responsible for and agency in what I could do. And so the very quotes that I had collected to inspire others inspired me and helped me redirect my attention to something that was more productive, you know. So next slide. And if you don't know, vibe coding is just, you don't need to have a coding background to code, that's the whole idea. Anybody can vibe code, you just talk to the chatbot and say this is the app or the thing that I want to have happen. It does help if you do know about programming, as I do, and so, so this has really for me been the most important contribution that AI has made to my practice as an artist. Next slide. And again, if you want to check out the app, you can scan it now. Next slide. And we're almost done. I'm going to show you a couple of other projects. If we can play the little clip here. So this is where I think that this is a metaphor for how AI can help us, and you know, where the power and the seductive power of the tool, we have to decide where we draw the line in terms of our practice, right? And that could be on a case-by-case basis. This show I was the second to last person hired for this show that has now been covered in the New York Times recently as they're on tour finishing I don't know, it might actually continue, but this was supposed to be the last summer. It started last year. I was invited to do the set design, the prop design and the scenic visuals for the show. And so one of the main things I had to design was this trunk, and then the other objects that they hold, and I also had to figure out what to do with the camera that they are filming themselves with, and all of the footage that I had to work with these artists. And I had 4 months to do it, and I had never worked in live theater before. Now, AI had really very little to do with this process, but the gift that this intense experience gave me was a way of working really rapidly with video using VJ software, Resolume Arena in particular, so that I was able to change my video practice, which is really one of my core mediums, to match my drawing practice with the same kind of ease, so that I can actually now work with video in real time, and I no longer have to think about working in a nonlinear editor, meaning like After Effects or Premiere, and just go chunk, 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 chunk. Instead, I program Resolume, I put in my clips, I think about how I want to assemble this, and then I take out my MIDI board, which is just a control surface. It could also be your keyboard or a mouse, and I performed the piece live, listening to the music, or in this case, I was performing while you were watching. I was actually in the back, literally controlling all of the camera connections and the archival footage, and blending and mixing and making things audio reactive. And so this tool, Arena, can be controlled through AI, and both controlled and programmed with AI. So the next phase of this is being able to create my own plugins for this tool that are specific to the needs that I have, that are very different from typical VJs. VJs are visual video jockeys, and I learned this, by the way, from one of my former students who is shown here, Nika Dotsenko, also known as Krolik, who gave a talk at Locust Projects about Resolume Arena just as I was starting this project.